All right, so how could the CBDC system end users to say enjoy more privacy, and are zero knowledge proofs kind of a way for that, right? And so where this is really going is we talked about in a previous video how a potential US CBDC system would be based off of public key cryptography, and we're basically just adding zero knowledge proofs to that, and what kind of pros and cons arise from adding zero knowledge proofs, and what's even the purpose of them, right? And so all of this kind of information and a link will be provided in the description below to a PDF for a paper published by the Office of Science and Technology from the White House. Just kind of going through all possible like US CBDC design choices, at least that come to mind, and kind of looking at the pros and cons of those, right, which are reflected in the playlist that you can also find at the end of the video. But anyways, so basically these cryptographic design choices, right, are meant to provide, secure transmission, storage, and usage of the data that people use, right? The whole point of cryptography, and you see this in Bitcoin too, right? And so basically what public key cryptography means, just kind of briefly, is, at least in the context of a CBDC, is the public key would kind of be like the payment address where you would be able to receive funds. The private key would be that basically you would use digital signatures to send the funds in general, right? The whole, I'm not going to go in depth. I'm sure there's probably thousands upon thousands of videos going more in depth on that on YouTube, just with how the crypto space has been the past few years, but we'll kind of leave that to them, right? So adding zero knowledge proofs to this PKC system, right? Public key cryptography, to kind of reiterate the acronym. The whole point is to facilitate secrecy, right? Basically so that the users, they're called zero knowledge proofs, right? It's kind of self-explanatory. So basically proving something with no knowledge of the transaction, I guess data itself is how we'll describe it. And so what I mean by this is basically being able to verify the validity of a transaction without actually giving up information about that transaction itself, meaning like the transaction details, the receipts, the amount, the counterparties, that sort of thing, without having to give up that information, so that, say, someone who has access to the ledger can see the transaction, sees who you're dealing with, who exactly you are, how much you're sending them, what you're buying in general, that sort of thing, right? Protecting that data, but still verifying that the transaction is not fraudulent, so to say. So what are some kind of pros and cons to this, right? So basically, kind of reiterating what I already said, it would kind of enhance privacy safeguards by verifying attributes of the transactions, right? Without, actually giving up those attributes of the transactions, right? And so this would limit, this provides limits for potentially revealing info that's being sent across the networks, right? Just the CBDC system itself, again, limiting revealing info like the transaction details we've been talking about. And then also one thing to note is some zero knowledge proofs are quantum resistant, according to the paper. I say according to the paper because I'm not a huge into the crypto space type guy, I guess you could say. I'm more interested in the aspects of specifically CBDCs and kind of learning the crypto stuff as I go, and I'm 100% open about that. But anyways, so what are some kind of, if I could speak this morning, what are some of the negative consequences of adding zero knowledge proofs to a public key cryptography CBDC system, right? And so it may prevent discoverability of information, and therefore the enforcement of AML and CFT compliance, which stands for anti-money laundering and counter-financing of terrorism, right? And it's a central bank digital currency system. You're dealing with the government or in the central bank and so on. So obviously there's everything they do, it seems, is about some form of adding regulation. And in this case, it's money laundering and counter-financing terrorism. Not going to get into the politics of it, but take it for what you will, right? I'll leave that up to you guys. One thing to note too is by adding zero knowledge proofs and kind of springboarding off of the previous comment, is this does increase the complexity of this compliance in general, right? And also kind of from a different slant, it just adds more computation, right? Because you're having it, Excuse me. I've had a sore throat the past few weeks, or I guess a week. Anyway, so this requires more computation than a CBDC system with just PKC itself, right? So only the public key cryptography methods, because you're adding zero knowledge proofs on top of that, right? So to quote explicitly from the paper, again, it will be important that the hardware that generates ZKPs, zero knowledge proofs, is sufficiently decentralized or protected, including from denial of service attacks, in order to not invite targeted attacks, right? And so again, we're going to start going into a lot more of the hardware that could possibly be involved, or software, and looking at, you know, what's the pros and cons of those as well. That's in the pipeline of videos, I should say explicitly, to keep that in mind, right? And so what exactly is a denial of service attack? Because I'm not a software guy either. I'm just kind of interested in this, and look, again, more focused on the CBDC aspect of it itself, and kind of learning everything else as I go. I mean, that's how you learn anything. But anyways, so a denial of service attack, I've seen this written as DOS, right, is meant to shut down a machine or network, making it inaccessible to its intended users. And then basically it seems like it could either like flood the target, you know, the website, the system, whatever it happens to be, with traffic, or basically has some information that it puts in there that triggers a crash, whatever that happens to be for whatever reason, right? Again, just kind of saying what that is. So whenever I do these kind of videos or the research for these, and I come across something that seems like it's important or at least interesting, I always try to look a little bit into it. Sometimes it gets its own video. I've done that in the past, looking at like treasury market liquidity and kind of how that works specifically, and on some kind of other topics that I look into. But anyways, you guys don't want to hear about that, or at least if you clicked on this video only. But anyways, I will put cards up in the corner for the video on just PKC and the pros and cons of that, and then also one specifically on CBDCs and quantum computing, because I made a little comment about ZKPs. Some of them are quantum resistant, and why exactly we should care and all that sort of thing will be in one of the videos on the right. So I hope to see you guys in one of those.